There are two ways to silence a community or population that you claim to speak for. The first approach is something that's painfully familiar to the Palestinians. The second approach to silencing is much more familiar to the Israelis living in Judea, Samaria, also known by much of the world as settlers. The first approach is really more aggressive. It's about taking the stage, grabbing a microphone, speaking on behalf of others by draining out the millions of voices that are actually there. It's an interesting situation where the international community continues to provide legitimacy to a Palestinian authority that claims to speak for Palestinians, whereas Palestinians may not exactly agree with that approach. We know that it is, of course, an undemocratic, I don't know if we should say regime, but government institution. And we know that the Palestinians, who I don't actually intend to speak for, but the Palestinians have not necessarily been served well, neither by the promises that are given to them, nor by sometimes their adverse humanitarian situation that they're living through. But it's actually not just the Palestinian Authority that is draining out the voices of the Palestinians themselves. We know that there is an anti-Israel delegitimization movement on the international scale that spends a lot of time and effort using those same Palestinians as convenient pawns to advance a particular political objective. But I think it's important to ask Palestinians, let's say, working in one of those factories that's boycotted or at a business that's boycotted, do they feel that the boycotters are looking out for their best interests when trying to shut down and shame a business which provides them with a monthly paycheck? And so that's the first kind of silencing. There's another kind of silencing, and it's more subtle, but perhaps more damaging. That's the silencing that happens when an Israel advocacy establishment, which hopes to speak on behalf of Israelis, tends to overlook or ignore an entire population or subpopulation within the Israeli landscape. And so we find all too often that when the issues come to a head and the accusations begin to flow, accusations of occupation and apartheid, so a lot of the Israel establishment advocacy community tends to sidestep the issues, avoid them if they can. So if you scream out at a demonstration something about occupation, your well-trained Hasbara activist may reach for his cell phone to show you either the most advanced Israeli technological app that's come out on the market, or perhaps some photos of beautiful beaches in Tel Aviv, maybe even an op-ed about Israel in Haiti, all important projects in and of themselves, but all attempts to sidestep the core issues. And so we're not really seeing the Israel advocacy coming along and talking about issues like justice, talking about issues like international law, environmental issues, humanitarian issues, economic issues, the things that are preoccupying the rest of the world. All too often, they're being sidestepped by those who claim to be Israel's best friends. And so when there's an apartheid week on a college campus and the Israel activists respond with a hummus week, you know that you not only have discounted the 450,000 Israelis living on this side of the Green Line, you've also undermined the entire legitimacy of the Jewish state. And so these two different forms of silencing actually share the same historic root. We're in a situation since before the establishment of the State of Israel, where the world, the international community, is speaking specifically about a two-state solution, and the stage is set in accordance with that conversation. And so we all tend to think, we, the greater global community, tends to think that if we just try to solve the problems for the Israelis and the Palestinians, then everything can move in a positive direction. Without, of course, engaging with the people living here and asking them what they have to say about their own situation. It may be, though, that this shared grievance of Palestinians and the so-called settlers is actually an opportunity. Because if we share the same grievance, then, at least in theory, we can share the same remedy. We can choose to move things in a new direction. Now, this initiative that we're calling TALK17 is that social experiment. We'll define what social experiment means, but is that social experiment where we try to reconfigure the paradigm. The TALK17, that 17 part, is about this opportune time. We're in the year 2017. We're 50 years after the Six-Day War and the renewed Israeli presence in Judea, Samaria. We're 100 years after the Balfour Declaration, when the international community decided to get involved in what would eventually become a Jewish state. And so really it's an opportunity to take stock of where we've been and to consider where we're going. There's a very thick glass ceiling, though, that we're trying to break through, because that ceiling gets thicker every year that passes, as long as this same conversation propels itself with the same monotone approach. Every UN resolution that's passed continues to push for for the identical diplomatic solution, which is ultimately the only solution that we know doesn't work. Again, trying a two-state solution since before the establishment of the State of Israel, one would suggest, isn't really working out very well. And at the same time, the same silencing approach, which is disenfranchising the people who live in the region and would be forced to live by the dictates of that document that would be signed in some other country. To break through that glass ceiling, we need to find the right setting. We do believe that the Ariel Regional Center for the Performing Arts, where we've assembled here today, is that bridge. 6 years ago, just before the Center for the Performing Arts opened, there was a boycott. The boycott was considered an historic boycott because it was lodged by Israelis, 36 performing artists and playwrights, who said that they had no interest in themselves nor their performances appearing on this stage. That made international headlines. It was an opportunity for the media to talk about a controversy narrative. But what the international media wasn't seeing was the response on the Israel end of things. Perhaps there's never been a stronger nationwide support for any project in Judea and Samaria so much as this one. And instead of 36 boycotters, from that year and thereafter, we continue with 185 performances a year and 550 waitlisted to appear on this stage as well. And so there's a big disconnect between, again, the way that the world views the issues and the way that the people living here experience them. Perhaps this is that location where controversy and consensus converge or collide, whatever you want to call it. When all of these things are happening together, maybe this is that opportunity to bridge the dichotomous gap. There is a glass ceiling. We hope to break through it. We have additional challenges. It wasn't easy getting TALK17 off the ground. Some of our speakers, Palestinian speakers, have been intimidated. They have some well-founded concerns that there may be some form of retribution from a Palestinian Authority for appearing on this stage. So some of them have recoiled a bit. We also have a similar challenge where some of the Israel advocacy establishment, who have been invited not necessarily to appear on the stage, but to be part of the audience, has also been reticent to participate. Unfortunately, further entrenching the gap. But fortunately, neither the Palestinian Authority nor the spokespeople for the Israel advocacy community are our target audience. We've opened TALK17 to the global community, to anyone who cares enough to try and really listen to the voices that are emerging here. This is an opportunity which we hope to make available to anyone who's got an internet connection. I mentioned a social experiment. This social experiment is not about how Israelis and Palestinians dialogue with one another. Those dialogues have been unfolding for generations, and they will continue to do so. This will, however, be an opportunity to provide a glimpse at how those conversations are developing. And so this social experiment tests not the people assembled here in this room. It tests not the Israelis and not the Palestinians. It's a test, if you will, to the rest of the world. When we finally choose to make our own voices audible, we hope to see that the rest of the world will choose to listen. Thank you.